Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this comforting expectation of absolute precision. It's almost like mechanical engineering.
Right. It's highly systematic.
Yeah, exactly. You fall, you break your arm, and the x-ray illuminates that jagged white line against the dark film, and the doctor just points and says, there it is. That is the problem.
Because it's binary.
Yeah.
You are looking at a system of cause and effect that leaves absolutely no room for interpretation.
Broken or not broken. It's so clean. And honestly, it is incredibly soothing. We desperately want things to be visible, to be neatly categorized, to have a specific label we can point to when things go wrong.
Right, because if you can see the fracture, you can apply the cast. The solution literally presents itself the moment the problem is illuminated.
Exactly. But then you step out of the hospital and into the arena of human ambition. You look at our grand pursuits, and suddenly that beautiful, precise X-ray machine is completely useless. We're staring at a diagnostic landscape that is, well, it's murky, it's chaotic, and it's just endlessly frustrating.
It's an entirely different environment.
It totally is. So imagine this universally recognizable scenario. You are standing right at the precipice of a grand ambition. Maybe it is a journey of total physical transformation. Maybe it is the birth of a novel enterprise that you have been dreaming about for a passage of eras. Or perhaps it's the pursuit of absolute mastery in some highly complex, obscure craft.
The very beginning of that cycle.
Yeah, the dawn of the cycle is intoxicating. The mind is absolutely ablaze with possibility. You buy the domain name, you purchase the high-end running shoes, you set up the pristine workspace. Those first few steps forward feel monumental. They feel electric. You go to bed thinking about it. You wake up thinking about it.
The initial momentum is a profoundly powerful force. I mean, that exact moment, it feels as though the entire universe is conspiring to push you forward.
Yes, you feel unstoppable.
There's an undeniable sense of inevitability to your success right then. You look at the road ahead, and you cannot possibly imagine failing, because the internal emotional reward is just so towering.
But then comes the drop, the inevitable crushing descent. That initial roaring fire dwindles into mere embers, and eventually just cold ash. Suddenly, your progress feels like a frozen glacier.
And the really fascinating thing is how we react to that frozen state.
Right, because you do not just stop. That is the funny part. You find yourself redesigning your workspace for the 100th time. You are like color-coding your digital folders.
Oh, the endless organization of the folders.
Yes, you are endlessly researching alternative paths, watching tutorials about the work instead of actually doing the work. Or you altogether abandon the endeavor for a new, shinier pursuit, convinced that the last idea was flawed, but this new idea, this one, is the golden ticket.
And eventually, you are left staring at the ceiling in the dark.
Wondering why. Why do I possess the map, the pristine vessel, and the favorable wind, yet continually abandon the voyage just as the safety of the shore disappears from view?
It is the great haunting paradox of human potential. You have assembled all the requisite elements for a monumental journey, yet the ship never reaches the distant horizon. And our natural reflexive instinct is to diagnose this as a structural flaw in the vessel itself.
We always blame the boat.
Exactly. We assume our strategy is fundamentally flawed. We assume we chose the wrong market, the wrong exercise routine, the wrong creative medium. Or, even more tragically, we assume our character is fundamentally lacking. We just tell ourselves we are lazy.
And that is the massive misconception we are taking apart today. Okay, let's unpack this. You sit there thinking your strategy is broken or your character is weak, but really, your nervous system is just screaming for entertainment like a toddler in a waiting room.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it. It's biological, not moral.
Right. So the core revelation of our exploration today is this profoundly original philosophical truth. The quiet, invisible assassin of human ambition is not a lack of discipline. It is not a fatal flaw in your character, and it certainly is not a deficient strategy. The true bottleneck, the grand filter of achievement, is a profound, almost biological inability to tolerate the agonizing silence of the mundane.
The secret to monumental success is the cultivation of an immense, unbreakable tolerance for monotony.
Which is wild because it's a complete inversion of how modern society views success. We are aggressively conditioned to associate massive achievement with relentless excitement, with a constant state of elevated passion and cinematic
We
inspiration.
want the montage sequence.
Exactly. We want the upbeat music and the fast cuts, but the actual architecture of mastery is not built out of lightning strikes. It is
Yeah.
built out of incredibly dull, repetitive, identical stones. True power is the ability to sit in a room entirely unentertained, devoid of all external applause, and simply execute the motion.
And that is so incredibly difficult for the modern mind.
Which is why our mission today is to map the architecture of this silent saboteur and construct an unbreakable foundation of endurance for you, the listener. Because if the inability to sit with silence is the true enemy, we must first understand the predictable gravitational pull that drags us away from our highest potentials.
We have to observe the trajectory.
Right, so if we are going to fix this, human endeavor follows an almost eerie universal pattern, does it not?
It absolutely does. It is startling how the overwhelming majority of human pursuits perish in exactly the same way. It does not really matter what the specific domain is. You could be building a financial empire, transforming your physical biology, or mastering a classical instrument.
The arc is the same.
The arc of failure is practically identical across all disciplines. It is a biological script that we follow unconsciously.
Let us trace that arc then. The first phase is what we will call the Dawn of Novelty. When you begin a new endeavor, your entire system is flooded with a rush of internal chemical rewards. Let us talk about the biology of that beginning, because it is essentially a trap, right?
It is a beautiful, completely necessary trap. When you introduce a completely novel stimulus to the human nervous system, so a new challenge, a new environment, a new conceptual framework, the brain responds by releasing a massive surge of reward molecules.
It's rewarding you for exploring.
Precisely. This is our evolutionary programming encouraging us to explore the unknown. During this dawn, every small action you take yields a highly visible ripple.
Because the learning curve is so steep, when you start learning a new language, going from 0 words to 10 words feels like you are an absolute genius.
You are moving from a state of total ignorance to fundamental competence, and that gap is incredibly rewarding to cross. Every passing moment brings a new realization. You make a minor adjustment to your technique, and you see an immediate, tangible improvement.
You are essentially intoxicated.
You are in a state of biological honeymoon. Your mind is receiving a constant roaring tide of positive feedback. The energy you expend is immediately matched and often exceeded by a surge of novel stimuli.
But there is a flaw in that, isn't there?
A huge structural flaw. This period of rapid acquisition creates a deeply incorrect expectation within the nervous system. You begin to unconsciously believe that the journey will always feel this charged, this undeniably rewarding, and this fast. You think the trajectory is a straight vertical line.
But then you cross the threshold. You hit the invisible wall and enter the second phase, which we call the Barren Flatlands. The excitement entirely evaporates, yet the intense labor remains.
The labor often becomes infinitely more difficult here.
Yeah, the easy gains are completely gone. Progress suddenly becomes completely invisible to the naked eye. The external world, which might have cheered you on when you first announced your grand new endeavor, completely stops offering praise.
The applause fades out.
Exactly. The effort to reward equilibrium feels deeply, aggressively unjust. You are pouring your precious life force into the soil, and absolutely nothing is sprouting.
This is the crucible where true capacity is forged or fractured. In the barren flatlands, the internal chemical rewards that fueled your early mornings and late nights have entirely dried up.
Because the brain is bored.
Right. The brain is no longer impressed by your basic competence, so it completely stops releasing the reward molecules. The external applause has vanished because your efforts are no longer novel to your social circle. You are completely alone with the unglamorous mechanical reality of the task.
Your mind, which had been feasting on an absolute banquet of novelty, is suddenly placed on a starvation diet of pure, unadulterated repetition.
And the mind rebels. It screams. It desperately demands the return of the excitement.
Which leads directly to the third phase, and honestly, this is the most insidious part of the whole orbit. The mirage of escape. The mind is absolutely desperate for a spark. It is suffocating in the profound monotony of the flatlands, so it invents incredibly rational-sounding excuses to flee.
Because quitting rarely looks like a dramatic, tearful surrender.
I mean, nobody sits down and says, I am going to abandon my live stream today because I am slightly bored.
That would shatter the ego. The ego simply cannot tolerate the admission of weakness. So the mind becomes a master architect of alibis. When the silence of the mundane becomes intolerable, it disguises the retreat as an intelligent strategic maneuver.
I am pivoting.
Exactly.
Hmm.
This strategy is no longer optimal. Or, I need to conduct a massive period of preliminary research before I take another step.
Oh, the research phase, the endless reading of books without ever doing the thing.
Or you suddenly discover a profound, overriding passion for a completely unrelated pursuit. You convince yourself that a different path aligns better with your newly discovered values.
When really you just mask a profound biological intolerance for boredom beneath a thick veneer of strategic brilliance. But I have to challenge this slightly because I know someone listening is thinking exactly what I'm thinking. Wait, how do we know we are not just stubbornly riding a sinking ship?
That's a very fair question.
Right, because sometimes a strategy actually is broken. Sometimes pivoting is the genuinely intelligent move. So how do we differentiate between necessary friction and just being foolishly stubborn in the barren flatlands?
That is the critical distinction we have to make. A structural failure in strategy produces negative feedback.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning you attempt the action, you gather data, and the data clearly demonstrates a flaw in the physics of your approach. The market rejects the product, the physical load causes an actual joint injury, the math is imbalanced.
Okay, so there is visible proof of failure.
Right. But the barren flatlands do not produce negative feedback. They produce absolutely no feedback. They produce silence. If you are abandoning a pursuit not because you have proof that it mathematically cannot work, but simply because the act of executing it feels heavy, uninspiring, and tedious, you are not pivoting.
You are fleeing the void.
You are fleeing the void.
Wow. That is a piercing distinction. Fleeing the silence versus fleeing a verified structural collapse. Consider the vast graveyard of abandoned brilliance throughout human history. It is genuinely staggering to contemplate. A vast constellation of masterpieces, world-shifting innovations, and grand empires exist only as ghosts.
Simply because the creators could not survive the barren flatlands.
Yes. Long enough for the invisible roots to take hold. They were standing mere inches from a massive structural breakthrough, but the silence in the room was just too loud for them to endure. Let us use a process from the natural world to ground this concept. Imagine you are planting a seed for a magnificent, towering oak tree. You place it deep in the dark earth, you provide the water, and then
You must wait.
you just wait. The surface of the soil remains entirely unchanged. Day after day, it is just a flat, brown, unremarkable expanse. If you lack the psychological capacity to endure that visible stagnation, what is your immediate impulse?
Well, you dig up the dirt. You want to visually confirm that the seed is actually doing something.
Precisely. You dig up the seed to check its progress, and in doing so, you expose the fragile, microscopic root system to the air.
And you kill it.
You kill it. You effectively destroy the unseen process happening beneath the dark earth simply because you demanded immediate visible entertainment from the soil.
You sacrifice the future forest for the immediate gratification of knowing. And we execute this exact destruction continuously with our ambitions.
We uproot our efforts because the surface remains barren. We are completely oblivious to the intricate, vital root systems that are aggressively expanding in the darkness of the unseen. Here is where it gets really interesting. We actually convince ourselves we are being productive when we run away.
We mistake motion for progress.
I will admit it, I have spent days optimizing a digital calendar system, creating beautiful, color-coded labels, completely avoiding the incredibly difficult, ambiguous creative work I actually needed to do. I felt busy, but I was just digging up the seed. Are we fundamentally biologically wired to reject the unseen?
It is less a moral failing of character and more a predictable, antiquated feature of human neurobiology. The human mind requires a staggering, unnatural capacity to self-motivate in a total vacuum of external validation.
Because in the distant past, that wasn't how survival worked.
Exactly. When our biology evolved in the distant past, effort was always tied to an immediate, tangible, visible outcome. You pursue the physical hunt, you secure the immediate sustenance, the feedback loop was instantaneous.
If you run, you survive the predator. Immediate result.
Right. But modern ambitions, mastering a complex science, building a legacy, writing a manuscript, require a massive, unprecedented delay between the expenditure of effort and the realization of the ultimate reward.
It's like a temporal disconnect.
It is. Our biological machinery is simply not calibrated for a vast expanse of invisible progress. We are asking an ancient system to perform a modern miracle.
So to truly understand why this barren stretch feels so unbearable, we cannot just look at our ancient wiring. We have to look at the incredibly artificial environment we have built around ourselves right now, which has entirely warped our natural equilibrium. We are not just fighting our evolutionary biology, we are fighting the specific, highly engineered, hyperstimulating world we currently inhabit.
This is the absolute crux of the issue. The modern world has artificially elevated the human threshold for stimulation to a towering, unprecedented magnitude. Our baseline expectation is no longer the quiet, slow rhythm of the natural world.
It's absolute chaos.
Our baseline is now an endless, roaring tide of novelty.
Let us talk about what happens to the brain in this environment. The flooded circuits. Through continuous, unbroken exposure to endless streams of digital novelty, our internal reward systems have been radically structurally recalibrated. Every single time we engage with a screen, every time we swipe or click, we are hit with a hurricane of micro-rewards.
A sudden flash of bright color, a new piece of scandalous information, a simulated social interaction.
We have unknowingly adapted to an environment of absolute sensory and emotional hyperabundance.
What is occurring here is the phenomenon of neuroplasticity, but it is operating entirely to our detriment. The nervous system is endlessly adaptable. It molds itself to the environment it encounters most frequently.
So if you immerse your brain in a hurricane
of intense, rapid-fire stimuli for the overwhelming majority of your waking life, it does not remain static. It shifts its entire baseline.
it builds a tolerance, like an internal thermostat.
That is a perfect analogy. Imagine a house with an internal furnace. If you suddenly start pumping extreme artificial heat into the house from an outside source, the internal thermostat recognizes the overwhelming heat and completely shuts off the house's own furnace.
Because it doesn't need to generate heat anymore.
Exactly. The brain operates identically with its internal reward molecules. When flooded with artificial digital stimulation, the brain downregulates its own natural production of those molecules. It begins to expect the artificial hurricane. It demands the hurricane just to feel a baseline level of normal.
Which brings us to the most dangerous trap of all, the illusion of pain. Because when you take a mind that expects a hurricane, a mind whose internal furnace has been completely shut off, and you plunge it into the quiet, still pond of focused, unglamorous work.
The absence of this immense stimulation registers to the nervous system not as peace, but as genuine, terrifying deprivation.
It perfectly mimics a physical substance withdrawal.
It is not a poetic metaphor. It is a profound physiological reality. When the anticipated constant flood of digital novelty is suddenly withheld, because you sat down to read a dense text or practice a difficult chord progression, the body literally interprets the silence as a threat to its survival. The nervous system sounds a biological alarm.
You experience actual physical symptoms.
Yes, you experience a visceral somatic discomfort. Your cortisol levels spike. Your heart rate might subtly elevate. You feel a generalized anxiety.
And this misdiagnosis is where our ambitions go to die. We feel this physical restlessness, a sudden tightness in the chest, an urgent crawling itch to move, a feeling that we are practically jumping out of our own skin. And what do? We incorrectly interpret this physical discomfort as a profound philosophical sign that our current task is the wrong path.
We think, well, if doing this work feels this utterly agonizing, I must not be meant to do it.
Right? I must not have the passion.
We fail entirely to recognize it as the body simply crying out for its accustomed flood of cheap novelty. If we understand this mechanism, the implications are absolutely staggering. We are fundamentally misdiagnosing biological withdrawal symptoms as deep existential intuition.
That gives me chills. People are abandoning their life's work. They are walking away from profound creative callings. They might even be walking away from deep, meaningful relationships, simply because they are experiencing the temporary physiological discomfort of a lowered stimulation environment.
They trust the pain.
They trust the discomfort as a compass when, in fact, the compass has been wildly demagnetized by their environment.
They believe the friction is a signal of failure, rather than the sound of the adaptation process beginning.
If this invisible addiction to intensity continues unchecked across our society, the capacity for profound human creation could shrink to a mere fragment of its historical potential. Think about it. The great enduring works of humanity, the soaring architectural cathedrals, the vast philosophical treatises, the paradigm-shifting scientific discoveries of the distant past, they all required immense, unbroken passages of profound silence.
Uninterrupted focus over a passage of errors.
Exactly. They required individuals capable of staring at a problem for a massive duration without needing a flashing screen to validate their existence. If fewer and fewer individuals can endure that quiet necessary for mastery, what happens to our collective human potential?
The entire landscape of human achievement flattens. We risk becoming a species capable only of producing the superficial, the immediate, the easily digested, and the highly optimized fragment. True, enduring mastery is forged strictly in the fires of sustained, monotonous effort. Without the structural tolerance for that fire, we are left with nothing but brief, useless sparks.
I want to use an analogy to really cement this feeling because everyone listening has felt this exact panic. Imagine a sailor who was born in the very heart of a raging oceanic tempest. From the exact moment they take their first breath, they know absolutely nothing but the deafening roar of the wind, the violent pitching of the wooden deck, the constant chaotic life-or-death struggle against massive waves.
Their entire internal equilibrium is flawlessly calibrated to absolute chaos.
Yes. That tempest is their sanctuary. Their internal gyroscope actually expects and requires violent movement to feel stable.
So what happens when it stops?
Exactly. Now imagine what happens when the storm finally breaks. The roaring winds die down to a whisper. The dark sky clears to a brilliant blue. The ocean waters turn to pristine, unmoving glass. Absolute flawless stillness.
That sailor does not stand on the deck and feel a profound sense of peace.
The sailor completely panics. They look at the flat water and believe the unnatural stillness is a harbinger of imminent death. The baseline of normal has been completely, entirely inverted. The silence feels like the mortal danger.
It is a brilliant, terrifying illustration. We are those sailors.
We totally are. We've been raised, or at least conditioned, in a relentless howling tempest of digital noise and hyperaccessibility. But when we finally manage to sit down at the empty desk to write the difficult manuscript, to balance the complex ledger, to execute the fundamental, quiet, foundational tasks of our ambition, we enter those glass-calm waters, and our demagnetized nervous system screams that we are in mortal peril.
So we have diagnosed the disease,
Yeah.
but I do not want to leave anyone stranded in the tempest.
Right. So what does this all mean for us? If our brains are essentially throwing a massive physiological tantrum because they aren't being constantly entertained, how do we fix a system that has fundamentally adapted to chaos? Are we just doomed to endlessly chase the next hit of novelty until our potential completely evaporates?
We are not doomed, and this raises the most important question of our discourse. Fortunately, the ultimate answer lies in the exact same mechanism that caused the problem in the first place.
Neuroplasticity.
Exactly. The mind is entirely beautifully malleable. The magnificent truth is that the same biological machinery that adapted to the artificial hurricane can be meticulously, deliberately retrained to find absolute peace and eventually immense unbreakable power in the profound stillness.
If the baseline can be reset, it means we can get our internal furnace working again. But it requires a deliberate step-by-step unspooling of our modern conditioning. We must construct a sturdy ladder out of the noise. And that brings us to the architecture of recalibration.
Building a tolerance to monotony is not some ethereal, abstract, philosophical concept. It is a tangible, highly trainable physical skill.
Like going to the gym.
It is identical to building muscular hypertrophy or cardiovascular endurance. It requires progressive, deliberate exposure, beginning with the smallest, most manageable increments and methodically building toward a vast expanse of sustained power. You do not conquer the tallest mountain in a single, uncalculated leap.
Right. You do not walk into a training facility having never lifted a heavy object in your life and immediately attempt to hoist a Titan's load. You would physically crush yourself. The exact same principle applies to attention. The journey to immense focus begins with the foundation of micro-exposures. This is about deliberately stripping the layers of artificial joy from your everyday baseline existence.
This is where the recalibration officially begins. It is the deliberate practice of untangling the artificial stimulation from the necessary, mundane actions of daily life.
It sounds so simple on paper, but when you actually try it, it is profoundly challenging. It means eating a meal in absolute, unmitigated silence. No screens propped up against your glass, no audio playing in your ears, no reading material, just the raw taste of the food, the mechanical act of chewing, and the stark quiet of the room.
And people find that agonizing.
They really do. It means walking through the physical world without an external soundtrack plugging your ears. It means doing a mundane household chore, folding garments, washing the floor, cleaning dishes, with only the rhythm of your own breath for company.
And we must understand what is happening beneath the surface during these specific micro-exposures. You are actively teaching the primitive panicking mind that an absence of continuous input is not a threat to your survival,
You are proving to your body that you are safe.
experientially demonstrating that you can exist in a total void of novelty and remain entirely physically intact. You are gently, methodically lowering the thermostat of your stimulation dependency.
It is exactly like reintroducing yourself to the crushing weight of gravity after floating in the weightlessness of space for a passage of eras. It feels incredibly heavy at first. It might even feel painful to your bones. But slowly, the bone density returns. The muscles adapt.
And once you have established that foundation, you move up.
Once you have that foundation of micro-exposures, you elevate to the next level. The crucible of singular focus. This is where you bind yourself to a solitary, difficult task for a substantial passage of time. And here is where the absolute unbreakable rule of this philosophy emerges.
The defining protocol of the entire methodology.
When you are in the crucible and the mind screams for an exit, when the physical itch to escape into a distraction becomes almost unbearable, you have only two permitted actions. You may either continue the task, or you may sit in total, paralyzing stillness. You may do absolutely nothing, but you may under no circumstances escape into novelty.
This is a remarkable, elegant mechanism of behavioral psychology. You are presenting the desperate mind with an uncompromising ultimatum. You are cordoning off every single escape route. The mind aggressively desires the distraction, but you offer it only the empty void.
I have to push back on this because it sounds almost psychotic when you first hear it. The do-nothing rule is wild. You are telling me that if I sit down to write a crucial, career-defining proposal, and the resistance hits me like a physical wall, and I physically cannot bring myself to type the next sentence, I just stare at the blank wall.
Yes.
I just sit there like a statue until my brain is so profoundly starved for stimulation that writing a tedious, boring sentence actually feels like a euphoric relief.
That is exactly what you do. It is the ultimate masterful hack against our own evolutionary biology. By utilizing the sheer crushing weight of absolute nothingness, the mind is violently forced to view the unsexy, difficult task as a sanctuary.
Because it just wants to do something.
The brain craves action. Given the binary choice between agonizing, unbroken, sensory-deprived silence and the execution of a mildly tedious task, the mind will eventually, inevitably, choose the task. The difficult work actually becomes the thrilling escape from the boredom.
That is dark, but it is absolute genius. You are literally weaponizing the boredom against itself. You are making the medicine taste better than the alternative of starvation. And once you master that crucible, once you can reliably deploy the void to force action, you ascend to the apex of infinite sameness, the ultimate echelon of human mastery. This is repetition entirely devoid of novelty.
This is the exclusive domain of the elite. It is the execution of the exact same sequence, at the exact same hour, across the passage of eras. There is zero variation introduced for the sake of entertainment.
You do not switch your technique just to feel a brief spark of excitement. You embrace the absolute unyielding sameness of the fundamental mechanics.
And here, the total absence of excitement becomes the very feature that allows immense compounding power to build. Consider what happens when that constant, exhausting background anxiety of, I should be checking something else or wonder what is happening elsewhere, entirely evaporates.
The mind expands. Time itself seems to stretch and warp, and what once felt like a suffocating cage of boredom becomes a boundless, magnificent open sky.
What is most fascinating here is the radical transition in the phenomenological experience of the individual. Initially, the repetitive sameness feels like a brutal prison. But as the nervous system fully adapts, the absolute predictability of the environment becomes a vast, empty canvas.
Because you aren't fighting yourself anymore.
Right, because you are no longer expending massive amounts of metabolic energy managing the internal craving for distraction. All of that freed cognitive bandwidth is channeled directly, fiercely, into the execution of the craft itself.
It is the difference between two elemental forces. Contrast a scattered, diffuse mist versus a highly concentrated, piercing beam of light. A vast expanse of scattered, highly stimulated work where you are jumping rapidly between tasks, continuously checking incoming notifications, functioning in a state of perpetual half-focus, is a diffuse mist. It obscures the landscape, it looks busy, but it possesses absolutely zero piercing power.
It leaves no structural mark.
None. That mist is utterly eclipsed by a brief, solitary, piercing beam of unbroken, silent focus. The concentrated beam can burn straight through solid steel.
The implications for our trajectory are profound. The overwhelming majority of people spend their entire conscious lives operating as a scattered mist. They feel incredibly busy. They feel as though they are in constant motion. But at the end of their days, they leave no permanent structural mark upon the world.
The rare individuals who fundamentally shape our reality are those who have meticulously trained their neurology to emit that concentrated, unbroken beam. However, knowing the architecture is utterly useless if the physical environment around you is constantly offering secret trapdoors.
Environment is everything.
You can possess the best intentions, the strongest philosophical resolve, but if you are trying to meditate in a room filled with blaring sirens, you will eventually crash your ship into the rocks. We are merely human.
This requires a vital transition from internal psychological resolve to external architectural design. Willpower is simply insufficient. We must now discuss the law of pure exposure and the construction of the fortress of friction.
For the nervous system to genuinely, permanently adapt to the silence, the exposure to the mundane must be fiercely, jealously protected. Layering artificial pleasure over a tedious task entirely destroys the biological training effect. Let us talk about the grave danger of crutches.
This is perhaps the most insidious and common trap encountered by those attempting this path. We constantly attempt to make the bitter medicine taste sweet. We attempt to artificially dilute the monotony to make it bearable.
Right. If you require a sweeping symphony of background noise, or a captivating narrative playing in your ears, or a constant stream of highly engineered external rewards just to complete a vital everyday task, you are not training endurance. You are actively building a vulnerability.
You are building a dependency.
You are repeatedly teaching your own mind that the only possible way to survive the mundane is to be pacified by an external force.
You are systematically robbing yourself of the neurological adaptation. The nervous system only adapts to the specific, unmitigated stressor it physically encounters. If you continually shield it from the stark reality of boredom by providing a digital crutch, it never develops the internal psychological musculature required to stand on its own.
You remain fragile.
You remain entirely dependent on an optimal, highly curated, perfect environment to function at all.
And as we know, willpower is a rapidly depleting finite resource. You cannot rely on raw, white-knuckle resolve to fight off an environment that was literally designed by thousands of engineers to distract you. Victory belongs solely to those who design a physical environment where escaping the task requires a monumental, exhausting exertion of energy.
The physical and digital space around you must be stripped to its absolute barren bones. This is the critical practice of the design of the void.
You must actively, ruthlessly curate a space that offers absolutely zero alternative pathways for the mind's desperate desire for novelty. The environment must be an uncompromising physical reflection of your singular, isolated intent.
We call this the gift of friction. Every single minor obstacle placed between you and an escape route buys a solitary, microscopic spark of time.
Let me give a practical example. If your primary device of distraction is locked in a metal safe in another room, powered completely down, the sudden impulsive urge to check it encounters massive, immediate physical resistance. You have to stand up, walk, unlock, and boot up.
And in that specific, manufactured friction, absolute magic occurs. In that tiny fragment of a moment, the conscious, rational mind can catch the reflexive, unconscious animal impulse.
You literally buy yourself time to think.
You experience the physical urge to flee the boredom. You physically encounter the obstacle you place there. And that momentary delay allows your higher reasoning to intervene. You can consciously, deliberately choose to turn around and remain in the discomfort.
I often imagine a future society where the ultimate status symbol has radically shifted. It isn't the ability to multitask a dozen massive projects or the possession of the most rapid, hyper-connected, glowing devices. Imagine if the true, undeniable mark of elite status was the profound, almost terrifying ability to be utterly unreachable and entirely unentertained while executing a singular, towering vision.
That is the definition of ultimate sovereignty. In a landscape where human attention is the most aggressively harvested commodity on the planet, the ability to completely withhold your attention from the tempest and direct it entirely, forcefully toward the mundane is the ultimate act of rebellion.
Think of the physics of a heavyweight. You do not build a Titan's immense physical strength by attaching lighter-than-air balloons to the iron to make it easier to lift. You do not try to float the weight up. You build power by feeling the uncompromising, crushing, brutal reality of the gravity. The friction is the ultimate teacher.
The unadulterated, heavy weight of the boredom is the exact mechanism of your growth. It is the biological law of resistance.
The heavy iron forces the physical muscle fibers to tear and rebuild stronger. The unmitigated heady silence forces the neural pathways to violently rewire themselves for sustained, unbreakable focus. But wait, this is such a paradigm shift. We spend absolutely all of our cultural energy trying to make the hard things soft.
We really do.
We invent endless software tools, life hacks, and philosophies designed explicitly to remove every ounce of friction from our daily lives. We want everything seamless. But you are telling me that the jagged edges, the heavy iron, the crushing gravity of boredom, those are the exact tools carving out our capacity for greatness.
Exactly. We have been sold a dangerous falsehood regarding the nature of freedom. True freedom is not the ability to access anything, anywhere, at any given moment.
That hyper-accessibility is merely an illusion of choice that masks a deep, profound enslavement to our lowest impulses.
True freedom is the independence from needing optimal, highly curated, perfect conditions to produce extraordinary results. It is the terrifying ability to sit alone in a completely barren room and summon an entire universe into existence purely from the strength of your own undistracted mind.
So we possess the philosophical map. We have constructed the physical fortress of friction. We intimately understand the biological sabotage happening in our brains. Now we must face the absolute most harrowing moment of the entire process, the very first step into the void. This brings us to the final phase of our exploration, the threshold of action and the unseen tally.
This is where all abstract theory violently collides with visceral, undeniable reality. All the intellectual preparation of the world cannot spare you from the physical shock of entry.
The fiercest, most violent resistance you will face is concentrated at the absolute, immediate beginning of the exposure. Surviving the violent transition from a state of high digital stimulation to a state of zero stimulation is the defining battle of the war. Let us examine the turbulence of transition.
When you cross the physical threshold from the chaotic, noisy world into your carefully designed void, your mind experiences a violent, shocking withdrawal. The initial moments of deep focus feel almost agonizing because the mind is frantically, aggressively searching for its accustomed flood of novelty.
It is a biological system in sudden, profound withdrawal, thrashing violently against the quiet confines of the silence.
But the secret weapon here is that expecting this turbulence completely neutralizes its power over you. When your heart rate spikes and you feel that crawling need to escape, it is not a sign of failure. It does not mean your grand strategy is fundamentally wrong or your deepest passion has suddenly evaporated.
It is simply the friction of the atmosphere upon re-entry. It is an entirely mechanical process, not a spiritual failing.
That cognitive reframe is absolutely vital for survival. When the agony of the silence hits you, instead of interpreting it as a signal to abort the mission, you must interpret it as the necessary, unavoidable initiation rite. You anticipate the thrashing of the mind, and you simply calmly observe it until it exhausts itself and subsides.
And to survive that thrashing without surrendering, you must employ the severing of negotiation. Action must completely and utterly outpace emotion. Waiting for the magical arrival of inspiration or motivation is a fatal, catastrophic error.
Motivation is a fickle, unpredictable weather pattern. It cannot be relied upon to water the crops of your ambition.
If you pause for even a solitary moment to debate with the mind will invariably, consistently win. The brain possesses a vast, ancient library of highly sophisticated rationalizations designed to conserve energy. The work must begin aggressively, almost recklessly. It must be beautifully unrefined, simply to sever the mind's ability to debate the action.
Just throw yourself violently into the motion. Make a massive mess. Write a genuinely terrible, unusable first sentence. Perform the physical repetition with absolutely atrocious form initially. Do whatever it takes just to break the icy paralysis of the void.
Action is the sharp blade that decisively severs the knot of hesitation. You do not negotiate with the resistance, you simply render it irrelevant through immediate motion. And once you are moving, how do you stay moving when there is no applause?
That is the function of the tally.
In the barren flatlands where progress is completely invisible, the only compass you possess is the unbroken, solitary chain of your own consistency. This is the anchor of the tally. You require a brutally simple, entirely honest tracking of your exposure to the void. It anchors you to physical reality, preventing the quiet, insidious erosion of your internal standards.
When the external world provides absolutely no feedback, no applause, and no validation, you must generate your own internal metric of success. The tally is not a measure of the quality of your output. It is strictly a measure of your presence. Did you endure the void today? Yes or no?
It is purely binary.
That unbroken chain of yeses becomes the new, profound source of internal reward.
Over the passage of seasons, this relentless, highly unglamorous showing up transforms the very core structure of human identity. The internal monologue radically shifts. It transitions from a fragile, desperate plea of, I'm struggling to build this difficult habit, to the massive, unshakable bedrock of, this is simply the undeniable nature of my being.
What is most fascinating here is the total evolution of the self. You cease to be a separate person attempting to force an action, and you literally become the physical embodiment of the action itself. The internal friction dissolves entirely. You are no longer choosing to endure the silence. The silence is simply where you live.
I want to return to that feeling of entering the void. Imagine a massive spacecraft piercing the Earth's atmosphere. The most violent, terrifying shaking, the blinding, searing heat, the deafening roar that makes you think the ship will tear apart. It all happens right at the boundary. The bolts are rattling, the hull is glowing a terrifying red.
The maximum dynamic pressure.
Exactly. But once it forcefully breaks through that atmospheric drag, it enters the cold, vast vacuum of space. And suddenly, it glides in absolute, pristine, majestic silence. The first moments of the unsexy task are the atmospheric drag.
It is a perfect physical representation. And the grand tragedy is that too many individuals interpret the shaking hull of their own minds as an impending, catastrophic explosion, so they panic and turn the ship around. They never endure the heat long enough to experience the frictionless, beautiful glide of deep, sustained mastery.
So, what does this profoundly deep philosophy mean for tomorrow morning? When the alarm sounds, we do not wait for the cosmic stars to align. We do not wait to feel a sudden, profound surge of cinematic inspiration. We just dive headfirst into the friction before the conscious brain even realizes we are awake. We actively embrace the shaping hull.
Because emotion is entirely always downstream of action. By completely ruthlessly decoupling your physical execution from your temporary emotional state, you become an unstoppable, elemental force of nature. You become entirely immune to the concept of bad days.
The turbulent weather of your internal emotional world becomes completely irrelevant to the execution of your duty. When you string enough of these quiet, entirely unglamorous victories together, something almost magical, almost terrifying begins to happen to the trajectory of a human life. We have to bring this journey to its philosophical summit here because the implications are so vast.
This requires a much broader reflection on the nature of human potential itself.
The ultimate equalizer in human achievement is not raw genetic intellect. It is not boundless inherited wealth or fortunate alignment of circumstances. The world is absolutely full of brilliant, wealthy, perpetually starting individuals who ultimately leave no lasting legacy whatsoever. The ultimate equalizer, the deciding factor, is the quiet, unbreakable capacity to endure the mundane.
That is the grand filter of reality. The overwhelming majority of the competition will simply, quietly eliminate themselves from the arena. You do not have to outsmart them. You do not have to out-innovate them with a superior strategy. They will walk off the battlefield entirely on their own accord simply because they cannot survive the crushing weight of their own boredom.
If you can outlast the silence, the monumental, inevitable power of compounding time will do all the heavy lifting for you. By sitting in the void, you are building a dangerous, unshakable consistency. A consistency that appears incredibly unsexy and unremarkable in the micro, but becomes an undeniable, massive force of nature in the macro.
It is the ultimate invisible advantage. While the rest of the world frantically searches for the next brilliant shortcut, the next optimal strategy, the next fleeting burst of digital inspiration, you are quietly, steadily, relentlessly turning the massive, heavy wheel of repetition.
I want to remind you, the listener, of the staggering, almost frightening power you hold right now at this exact moment. This capacity we have explored today is not a mysterious gift bestowed by genetics. It is a formidable fortress you can begin constructing this very second. Absolutely no one can give it to you, and absolutely no one can steal it away. It requires absolutely no external resources, no capital, no permission. It demands only one thing: the sheer, raw willingness to sit entirely still, in the quiet, when every single fiber of the modern world is desperately begging you to run.
It is a radical, uncompromising reclamation of your own limitless potential.
So I leave you with a final lingering inquiry to ponder in your own profound silence. If the vast graveyard of human ambition is filled to the brim with brilliant minds who simply got bored, what universe-altering masterpiece is currently lying dormant inside your most tedious, repetitive daily task, just waiting for you to stay in the room long enough to bring it to life?